The massive crystalline palace of Emperor Zixthala stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian ground, its towers reaching toward the twin suns of Dracarys Prime. Within its walls, the most powerful being in the Galactic Coalition ruled over 700 inhabited worlds. His scales shimmered with an iridescent blue-black that spoke of ancient power, and his eyes burned like molten gold. When Emperor Zixthala spoke, entire star systems listened. But today, those golden eyes were dim with worry. Prince Kethera lay motionless in his crystalline sleeping chamber, his young scales dulled to a sickly gray. The 12-year-old dragon prince had been the pride of his father's heart, showing promise of great power and wisdom. Now, he barely breathed, his small chest rising and falling in irregular patterns that made the Emperor's massive heart ache. "The medical scanners show nothing, Your Magnificence," reported Dr. Velmox, the court's chief physician. His own scales were a deep emerald, marking him as one of the most skilled healers in the Empire. "The prince's life force is simply fading. We have tried every treatment, every ancient remedy known to our people." Emperor Zixtala's claws scraped against the crystal floor as he paced. Around him, dozens of the Empire's greatest minds had gathered. Scientists from the aquatic Meritidians had brought their bioregeneration chambers. The telepathic Zephyrians offered their mind-healing techniques. Even the mysterious energy beings called the Luminar had sent representatives with their light-based therapies. All had failed. "Perhaps," suggested Chancellor Mordak, his voice carefully neutral, "it would be wise to begin considering succession protocols." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees as Emperor Zixtala's fury radiated outward. Ice crystals formed on the walls, and several courtiers stepped back in fear. "My son will not die." The Emperor's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Continue your efforts. Find something, anything." But as the weeks passed, Prince Kethara grew weaker. The Imperial Court began to whisper among themselves. Some suggested the prince was cursed. Others wondered if this was divine punishment for some unknown transgression. A few brave souls even questioned whether the prince's condition might be beyond their understanding. The Emperor refused to hear such talk. He summoned healers from across the galaxy, offering rewards beyond imagination for anyone who could save his son. Exotic treatments arrived daily, rare minerals, ancient artifacts, genetic modification procedures that had never been attempted on dragon physiology. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, in the lowest levels of the Crystal Palace, a human named Marcus Chen pushed his maintenance cart through corridors that most of the court had forgotten existed. At 42 years old, Marcus was unremarkable by most standards. Average height, brown hair starting to show gray at the temples, and the calloused hands of someone who had worked manual labor his entire life. He wore the simple gray uniform of the palace cleaning staff, a position that made him effectively invisible to the nobility above. Marcus had been working in the palace for 8 years, ever since the Dragon Empire had conquered his home colony of New Geneva. Unlike many humans who had been enslaved or forced into military service, Marcus had shown an aptitude for maintaining the complex crystal technology that powered the palace. His steady, methodical approach to his work had earned him a small measure of respect from his immediate supervisors. He moved through the service tunnels with quiet efficiency, checking atmospheric processors and cleaning the intricate crystal networks that carried power throughout the building. It was honest work, and it kept him fed and housed. More importantly, it kept him alive in an empire where humans were considered little more than clever animals. As he worked near the palace's central core, Marcus could hear the vibrations of movement in the upper levels. The entire court was in constant motion these days, physicians and scientists rushing back and forth with new treatments for the prince. Marcus had caught glimpses of the young dragon a few times during his duties, always accompanied by worried attendants and stern guards. The prince had seemed like a good kid, from what Marcus could tell, unlike some of the adult dragons, who looked at humans with barely concealed disgust. Prince Kethara had once nodded politely when Marcus had stepped aside to let a royal procession pass. It was a small gesture, but it had surprised Marcus. Most dragons acted as if humans were furniture. Now the prince was dying, and the mightiest empire in the galaxy seemed helpless to save him. Marcus paused in his work as he heard footsteps echoing through the service corridor. It was unusual for anyone to visit this level, but not unheard of. Sometimes palace security would patrol the lower areas, or an engineer might need to access the main power systems. But the footsteps were different, lighter than a dragon's heavy tread, yet not quite matching the quick pace of other palace staff. Marcus gathered his tools and moved toward the sound, curious despite himself. What he found made him freeze in shock. Prince Kethara sat hunched against a crystal wall, his young form trembling with weakness. The prince had somehow made his way down from his chambers, though how he had managed it in his condition was a mystery. His scales were now completely gray, and his breathing was so shallow that Marcus could barely see his chest moving. "Your Highness," Marcus whispered, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. The young dragon's head turned slowly toward him, golden eyes struggling to focus. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't want to die in that room," Prince Kethara said, "everyone looking at me like I'm already dead. I wanted to be somewhere quiet." Marcus felt his heart break a little. He had children of his own once, back on New Geneva, before the conquest. He knew what it was like to see a child suffering and feel powerless to help. Carefully, he approached the young prince. "Your Highness, you shouldn't be down here alone. Let me call for help." "No," the prince said, surprising Marcus with the firmness in his voice. "Please, just stay with me for a moment. I'm tired of being poked and prodded. I'm tired of seeing my father look so sad." Marcus hesitated. Being found alone with the prince could be interpreted in any number of ways, none of them good for a human servant. But looking at the young dragon's exhausted face, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He sat down on the floor near the prince, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "What's your name?" Prince Kethara asked. "Marcus Chen, Your Highness. I work in maintenance." "You're human?" "Yes, Your Highness." The prince was quiet for a long moment. "Do humans get sick like this?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes. When I was young, my sister got very sick. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her either." "Did she get better?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Eventually, yes, but not because of anything the doctors did. My grandmother took care of her, fed her simple foods, made sure she rested, talked to her when she was scared. Sometimes healing isn't about fancy medicine." Prince Kethara's eyes showed interest for the first time. "Your grandmother was a healer?" "Not exactly. She was just wise, I guess. She understood that sometimes being sick isn't just about the body. Sometimes the spirit needs healing too." The young dragon was quiet again, but his breathing seemed a little easier. Marcus found himself talking, sharing stories of his grandmother's simple remedies and quiet wisdom. He spoke of how she would make special soups when someone was ill, how she would sit by bedsides and tell old stories, how she believed that caring for someone was sometimes more important than curing them. Time passed unnoticed in the quiet corridor. Prince Kethara listened with growing attention, and Marcus began to see a spark of something in those golden eyes. Not recovery exactly, but perhaps hope. "Marcus," the prince said eventually, Would you help me get back to my room? I think I'm ready to try again." Marcus nodded and carefully helped the young dragon to his feet. As they walked slowly through the service corridors toward the royal chambers, neither of them noticed the security drone that had been silently observing their conversation. Within minutes of their departure, the recording was being analyzed by palace intelligence. By the time Marcus had safely delivered the prince back to his chambers, the decision had been made. The human would be questioned. Marcus returned to his duties, unaware that his simple act of kindness was about to change everything. In the depths of the palace, powerful forces were already in motion, and a lowly maintenance worker was about to find himself at the center of the most important crisis the Dragon Empire had ever faced. Above, in his crystalline chamber, Prince Kethara lay down in his bed with something he hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since his illness began, he was thinking about tomorrow instead of whether he would see it. The seed of an idea was growing in his young mind, and with it, the first stirrings of genuine hope. Marcus was scrubbing crystal conduits in the lower engineering section when the guards found him. 4 massive dragon warriors in gleaming armor, their presence filling the narrow corridor with barely contained menace. Marcus looked up from his work, his heart immediately beginning to race. "Marcus Chen," the lead guard rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "You will come with us." There was no point in asking questions. Marcus set down his cleaning tools and followed the guards through passages he had never seen before, deeper into the palace than he had known existed. They passed through security checkpoints where scanners bathed him in uncomfortable light, recording everything from his heartbeat to the chemical composition of his breath. Finally, they arrived at a circular chamber carved from black crystal. In the center sat a figure that made Marcus's blood freeze in his veins. General Crexmore was the Emperor's chief interrogator, a dragon whose scales had long ago turned the deep red of old blood. His reputation for extracting truth from unwilling subjects was legendary throughout the Empire. When Crexmore focused his attention on someone, they told him everything they knew and often things they didn't know they knew. Human. Crexmore's voice hissed like escaping steam. You were observed speaking with Prince Kethera in an unauthorized location. Explain yourself. Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. The prince was sick and lost, sir. I helped him return to his chambers. The surveillance recording indicates a conversation lasting 47 minutes. What did you discuss? Marcus's mind raced. How much should he reveal? What would sound suspicious? The prince was scared, sir. He asked about human sickness. I told him some stories my grandmother used to tell. Crexmore's eyes narrowed to burning slits. Stories about what, specifically? Just old remedies, folk wisdom, nothing medical. The interrogation continued for hours. Crexmore probed every detail of Marcus's background, his family history, his time in the palace. He asked about Marcus's grandmother dozens of times, clearly believing there was some hidden significance to her stories. But Marcus had told the truth. His grandmother had been a simple woman with no special powers or secret knowledge. She had simply understood that healing sometimes required more than medicine. Eventually, even Crexmore seemed satisfied that Marcus posed no threat. The human was clearly what he appeared to be, a maintenance worker who had shown unexpected kindness to a suffering child. You will be assigned new duties, Crexmore announced finally. You are now responsible for cleaning and maintaining the prince's personal chambers. You will report any change in his condition immediately. Marcus blinked in surprise. Sir, the prince specifically requested your presence. His magnificence has decided to honor this request, though I suspect it is the delusion of a dying child. You will not disappoint him. As Marcus was escorted to the royal wing of the palace, he tried to process what had happened. Prince Kethera had asked for him specifically. Why? The prince's chambers were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Walls of pure crystal rose 30 feet overhead, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns of light. Exotic plants from dozens of worlds grew in carefully maintained environments. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. And in the center of it all, in a bed carved from a single massive emerald, lay Prince Kethera. The young dragon looked even worse than before. His scales had lost all color, appearing almost translucent. Medical equipment surrounded his bed, connected to him by crystalline tubes that pulsed with alien energy. Physicians moved quietly around the room, monitoring displays that meant nothing to Marcus. But when the prince saw Marcus enter, those golden eyes brightened with something approaching joy. You came, Prince Kethera whispered. The prince requested you specifically, Doctor. Velmox informed Marcus with obvious disapproval. I do not understand why, but his magnificence has commanded that you be given access to these chambers. You are not to interfere with any medical procedures. Marcus nodded and began his assigned duties, cleaning crystal surfaces and maintaining the room's complex atmospheric systems. But as he worked, he found himself watching the prince, noting small details that the medical equipment might miss. Prince Kethera lay perfectly still most of the time, but Marcus could see tension in his young body. The constant hum of machinery, the bright lights, the endless parade of physicians conducting tests and procedures. It all seemed to weigh on the boy's spirit. During a quiet moment when the medical team had stepped out for consultation, Marcus approached the prince's bed. Your Highness, he said softly. How are you feeling? Tired, the prince replied. Everything hurts, but not the way they think it hurts. Marcus thought he understood. The machines are very loud. Yes. And the lights are too bright. And everyone keeps sticking things in me and taking pieces of me away for testing. I know they're trying to help, but... The prince trailed off. But sometimes the cure can feel worse than the sickness. Marcus finished. Prince Kethera nodded weakly. I keep thinking about what you said, about your grandmother, about healing the spirit. Marcus glanced around to make sure they were alone. What would you like to know? Tell me about the soup, the prince said. You mentioned she made special soup when people were sick. Marcus smiled despite himself. Nothing fancy, just simple ingredients, prepared with care. She always said the most important ingredient was love. Love? She meant that caring about someone's well-being was more powerful than any medicine. When someone is sick, they need to know that they matter to someone, that their life has value. Prince Kethera was quiet for a long moment. My father loves me. I can see that, Your Highness. Every time I see him in the corridors, I can see how worried he is. But he's afraid, the prince said. He's so afraid of losing me that he can't just be with me. He brings in more doctors, more treatments, more machines. He's trying so hard to save me that he forgets I'm still here. Marcus felt a deep sadness for both the emperor and his son. Fear could drive people to desperate measures, even when those measures made things worse. What would help you feel better? Marcus asked, gently. I don't know, the prince admitted. I just wish things could be simple sometimes, like when I was little, before I had to learn about ruling and politics and all the responsibilities of being an heir. I used to love listening to stories. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind. What kind of stories? Any stories. Adventures. Legends. Even simple tales about ordinary people. Stories made me feel like the universe was bigger than just the palace and my duties. That evening, after the medical team had completed their daily rounds, Marcus began telling Prince Kethara stories. Not grand epics of galactic conquest, but simple tales from his own childhood. Stories about children who overcame their fears, about ordinary people who found extraordinary courage, about the small kindnesses that could change the world. The prince listened with growing attention, his breathing becoming steadier as he focused on Marcus's words rather than his pain. Word of these storytelling sessions eventually reached Emperor Zixthala. The great dragon ruler arrived at his son's chambers one evening to find Marcus sitting beside the prince's bed, describing a sunset he had once seen on New Geneva. And the whole sky turned the color of molten gold, Marcus was saying, like someone had painted it with dragon fire. Prince Kethara actually chuckled at this, a sound his father hadn't heard in months. Emperor Zixthala stepped into the room, his massive presence immediately commanding attention. Marcus scrambled to his feet and bowed deeply. Your Magnificence, Marcus said, his voice tight with nervousness. Continue your story. The emperor commanded, his golden eyes fixed on his son's face. Marcus hesitated, then sat back down. Where was I, Your Highness? The golden sky, Prince Kethara said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. As Marcus continued his simple tale, Emperor Zixthala watched in amazement. His son was not only alert but engaged, responding to the story with an animation that no medical treatment had been able to achieve. When the story ended, the emperor dismissed Marcus with a gesture. But instead of anger or suspicion, there was something approaching gratitude in his ancient eyes. Father, Prince Kethara said after Marcus had left, I feel better when he's here. Better how? The emperor asked, settling his massive form beside his son's bed. Not cured better. Just peaceful better. Like maybe dying wouldn't be so scary if someone cared about me as a person instead of as a prince. Emperor Zixthala felt something crack inside his chest. In all his efforts to save his son, had he forgotten to simply be with him? That night, for the first time since his son's illness began, the emperor dismissed the medical team and sat alone beside Prince Kethara's bed. They talked quietly about small things, memories from the prince's childhood, stories from the emperor's own youth, simple moments of connection that had nothing to do with politics or medicine. Prince Kethara slept better that night than he had in months, but his condition was still deteriorating. Despite the improvement in his spirits, his body continued to fail. The medical scanners showed his life signs growing weaker each day. Whatever was killing him operated beyond the reach of both advanced technology and simple kindness. Dr. Velmox approached the emperor the next morning with grim news. Your Magnificence, the prince has perhaps days remaining. We have exhausted every treatment option. Emperor Zixthala stared at his son's sleeping form and made a decision that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Send for the human, he commanded. If my son is going to die, he will do so with dignity and peace, not surrounded by machines that have failed to help him. As word spread through the palace that the emperor was abandoning medical treatment in favor of a human servant's folk remedies, the court buzzed with confusion and outrage. But in the prince's chambers, something remarkable was beginning to happen. With the constant medical procedures stopped, Prince Kethara's natural healing processes began to function more effectively. His body, no longer fighting both his illness and the stress of constant intervention, found small reserves of strength. Marcus continued his gentle care, telling stories and creating an atmosphere of calm in the previously frantic chambers. The emperor spent hours at his son's bedside, finally able to simply be a father rather than a desperate ruler trying to command death itself to retreat. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. But the greatest test was yet to come. Forces within the Empire were beginning to move, and Marcus's simple act of kindness was about to trigger consequences that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. The palace corridors buzzed with whispers of rebellion. Chancellor Mordak moved through the crystal halls with purpose, gathering support among the noble houses. To many in the court, Emperor Zeeks-Thala's decision to abandon advanced medical treatment in favor of a human's folk care seemed like madness. The Emperor has lost his mind to grief, Mordak told the gathered nobles in his private chambers. He allows a human slave to influence the treatment of our future ruler. This is not leadership. This is weakness. The assembled dragons nodded in agreement. Duke Rextar, whose own military forces controlled 3-star systems, spoke with barely contained anger. My physicians could have saved the prince with proper gene therapy. Instead, we watch him die while a human tells him bedtime stories. The succession protocols are clear, added Baroness Silneth, her voice sharp with ambition. If the prince dies, the Empire needs strong leadership. The humans have already shown they can influence our emperor. What happens when they try to influence whoever comes next? Similar conversations were taking place throughout the Empire's power structure. Military commanders questioned whether they should continue following orders from an emperor who seemed to value human advice over dragon wisdom. Planetary governors began making discreet inquiries about their loyalty obligations. The great machine of imperial control was developing cracks, but in the prince's chambers, a different kind of revolution was taking place. Prince Kethara's condition had stabilized for the first time in months. The constant monitoring equipment had been removed, replaced by a simple atmospheric regulator that maintained optimal air quality. The harsh medical lighting had been dimmed, allowing natural light from the palace's crystal walls to provide gentle illumination. Marcus had established a routine that seemed to give the prince strength. Morning stories while preparing simple, nutritious meals. Afternoon conversations about anything except politics or royal duties. Evening tales that helped the young dragon sleep peacefully. "Tell me about your children," Prince Kethara said one afternoon. They had been talking about families, and Marcus had mentioned his own lost family. Marcus hesitated. The memory still hurt, even after 8 years. Sarah was 7, Tommy was 9. They were everything to me. What happened to them? When the fleet arrived at New Geneva, the planetary defense forces tried to fight back. The dragons had to eliminate the resistance quickly. The bombing was very precise, but Marcus stopped, unable to continue. "I'm sorry," Prince Kethara said quietly. "I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry." Marcus looked at the young dragon with surprise. "Your Highness, it wasn't your fault. You were only 4 years old when the conquest happened, but it was my father's army, my empire." The prince struggled to sit up straighter. "Does it hurt, knowing that?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "At first, yes. I hated all dragons. I thought you were all monsters who killed for pleasure. But working in the palace, seeing your father worry about you, seeing how much you care about doing the right thing, I learned that dragons aren't so different from humans. You love your families. You try to protect the people you care about. Sometimes you make terrible mistakes. Do you forgive us?" "I forgive you," Marcus said simply. "Hate is too heavy a burden to carry forever." Prince Kethara was quiet for a long time. "When I'm better, if I get better, I want to make things different. I want the Empire to be better. How? I don't know yet. But this has taught me something important. Power means nothing if you don't understand the people you rule. All these months, the greatest minds in the Empire couldn't help me, but a human janitor understood what I needed." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Emperor Zeeks-Thala entered the chambers, but he was not alone. Behind him came a delegation of the Empire's most powerful nobles, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed hostility. "My son," the Emperor said formally, "the Imperial Council wishes to discuss your condition." Chancellor Mordak stepped forward, his green scales glittering with authority. "Your Highness, we are pleased to see your improvement. However, the Council has serious concerns about the unconventional treatment you have been receiving." Marcus moved quietly toward the edge of the room, hoping to avoid attention. But Prince Kethara noticed his withdrawal. "Marcus, please stay," the prince said clearly. "I want you here." The nobles exchanged glances at this breach of protocol. A human servant had been invited to remain during a formal council session. Your Highness, Duke Rex, Tar said with forced patience, while we respect your friendship with this human, matters of imperial importance should be discussed among dragons. Matters of imperial importance are exactly what we should be discussing, Prince Kethara replied, his voice stronger than it had been in months. This human saved my life when the greatest medical minds in the Empire had failed. Doesn't that suggest we might have something to learn? The human provided comfort, Baroness Silneth said dismissively. Nothing more. Any improvement in your condition is surely due to the treatments you received before. No, the prince said firmly. The treatments were making me worse. The stress, the constant procedures, the fear in everyone's eyes. It was killing me faster than any disease. Emperor Zeexthala watched his son with growing amazement. Despite his illness, Prince Kethara was showing a strength and clarity that reminded the emperor of his own youth. What are you suggesting? Chancellor Mordak asked carefully. I'm suggesting that maybe the Empire's greatest weakness is that we've forgotten how to see beyond our own perspective, Prince Kethara said. Marcus helped me not because he's a magical healer, but because he approached my sickness differently than anyone else. He treated me like a person instead of a political problem to solve. And this proves what exactly? Duke Rex Tar demanded. It proves that diversity of thought makes us stronger. How many other problems in the Empire might be solved by listening to voices we've been ignoring? The nobles stirred uneasily. This line of thinking was dangerously close to questioning the fundamental hierarchies that kept the Empire stable. Your Highness, Mordak said with careful diplomacy, illness can sometimes cloud judgment. Perhaps when you have fully recovered, these philosophical questions will seem less pressing. Prince Kethara's golden eyes flashed with anger. My judgment has never been clearer. I've spent months thinking about what kind of ruler I want to be. This empire rules through fear, but it could lead through cooperation. Cooperation with inferior species? Baroness Silneth laughed harshly. Your Highness, with respect, humans and other species are useful for labor and resource extraction. They are not partners in governance. Why not? The prince asked simply. What makes us inherently better rulers than other species? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The nobles looked to Emperor Zeexthala for support, expecting him to correct his son's dangerous thinking. Instead, the emperor spoke quietly. Continue. Prince Kethara drew strength from his father's support. Dragons are physically powerful and naturally intelligent, but we're also proud and rigid in our thinking. We've built an empire based on conquest, but empires built only on force eventually fall. The species we've conquered have skills and perspectives we lack. If we brought them into real partnership instead of keeping them as subjects, we could build something stronger and more lasting. This is madness, Duke Rex Tar snarled. Your Highness, you speak of giving power to species that would destroy us given the chance. Some would, the prince admitted, but many wouldn't. Marcus had every reason to hate dragons. We destroyed his family and enslaved his people. Yet when he found me sick and alone, he helped me, not because he had to, but because he chose compassion over revenge. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the room. The nobles looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust, but Prince Kethara and Emperor Zeexthala watched him with something approaching respect. The prince speaks wisdom, the emperor said finally. Perhaps it is time for the empire to evolve. Chancellor Mordak's expression hardened. Your Magnificence, with the greatest respect, this conversation borders on treason. The natural order exists for a reason. Dragons rule because we are strongest. To suggest otherwise is to invite chaos. And yet, the emperor replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, my son lives because a human understood something that all our strength and knowledge could not provide. The room fell silent. The nobles realized they were witnessing a fundamental shift in imperial policy, and many of them were not prepared to accept it. Over the following days, as Prince Kethara continued to recover, the palace became a battleground of ideologies. Progressive nobles who had long believed in reform found their voices strengthened by the prince's recovery and philosophy. Conservative factions organized in opposition, arguing that the emperor's gratitude was clouding his judgment. Marcus found himself at the center of political forces he barely understood. Some dragons treated him with newfound respect, while others viewed him as a dangerous symbol of imperial weakness. Security around him was increased, as intelligence reports suggested possible assassination attempts. But the most significant change was in Prince Kethara himself. His physical recovery accelerated, As his sense of purpose grew stronger, he began meeting with representatives of various species within the empire. Learning about their cultures and perspectives, he studied history and philosophy, developing a vision of what a truly cooperative galactic civilization might look like. Emperor Zixthala watched his son's transformation with pride and concern. The prince's ideas were admirable, but implementing them would require navigating treacherous political waters. Still, the emperor had lived long enough to recognize wisdom when he saw it, even when it came from unexpected sources. The crisis came 3 months later when Duke Rex Tar attempted a military coup. His forces surrounded the palace, demanding that the emperor abandon his dangerous experiments with interspecies cooperation and return to traditional dragon supremacist policies. As alarms blared throughout the crystal corridors, Marcus found himself in an ironic situation. The human who had once been invisible to the imperial court was now considered valuable enough that special forces were assigned to protect him. But the coup failed before it truly began. Word of Duke Rex Tar's treachery spread quickly through the Empire's communication networks, and the response surprised everyone, including the rebels themselves. Species throughout the Empire, inspired by stories of Prince Kethara's recovery and his vision for reform, rose in support of the Emperor. Human colonies that had been quiet for years suddenly pledged their loyalty. Meritidian aquatic forces deployed their fleets against rebel strongholds. Even the energy being Luminar, typically neutral in political matters, offered their assistance. Within days, Rex Tar's rebellion crumbled as his own forces defected to join the Imperial loyalists. The Empire discovered that loyalty based on shared vision was stronger than control based on fear. A year later, Marcus stood in the same crystal chamber where he had first been interrogated. But this time, he wore the formal robes of an Imperial advisor, and he was not alone. Representatives of dozens of species stood beside him as Emperor Zixthala and Prince Kethara announced the formation of the Galactic Cooperation Council. Today, Prince Kethara announced, his voice strong and clear, "We begin a new chapter in galactic history, not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners working toward a common future." The ceremony was broadcast throughout the Empire, watched by trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Many were skeptical, some were hostile, but enough were hopeful to make the experiment worthwhile. As the formal proceedings concluded, Marcus found himself alone with the prince for a moment. "Do you think it will work?" Prince Kethara asked quietly. "I think," Marcus replied, "that caring about people's well-being is still the most powerful force in the universe, and you've built something that puts that principle at its center. That's a good foundation." The young dragon smiled, his scales now restored to their full brilliant luster. "My grandmother would have approved." "Your grandmother?" "That's what I've started calling her. The human grandmother whose wisdom saved the Empire. I never met her, but her teachings through you changed everything." Marcus felt tears in his eyes. Somewhere in the vast cosmos, an old woman's simple understanding of human kindness had grown into something that might just save the galaxy. The Empire had learned to listen, and in listening, it had discovered that the greatest strength came not from ruling others, but from understanding them. It was, as Marcus's grandmother might have said, the most important ingredient of all.